Hello, I'm Gary Quinn, and welcome to another episode of Ready, Set, Live. My guest today is a young, upcoming talent, I would say. He's a writer, he's an activist, and a commentator, and he is, I would say, Hollywood royalty. James Duke Mason. Welcome to the show, James.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here.
I know you probably say, oh, Hollywood royalty, but growing up well, you didn't grow up in Hollywood, but your parents did. And for some of those who are listening or watching, James has such a great group of family members. His mother is the iconic singer Belinda Carlisle, who's been on the show, and his father is James Mason, who his father was a famous actor and his mother was Hollywood royalty. So basically, you're a prince.
Well, that's extremely kind. I mean, I think, you know, I always think about it in the sense that, it's nothing to do with me. I just respect my mother so much for what she's accomplished. I respect, even though I never met my grandfather, James Mason, I've always really looked up to him and admired him for, the over 150 films that he did over his life. So for me, it's more, things to look up to. And I see these people as my mother, my grandfather, my dad, who worked in the White House, was a producer in his time, back in the day. I see them as sort of inspirations. And but I'm also, when I hear the royalty thing, I always think, it's important. I'm all about trying to, both respect and look up to my family, but also blaze my own trail, because I understand that their accomplishments aren't my accomplishments, and so I need to prove myself and
Correct.
earn my success.
And I think what's great is, I think there's a whole group of, I would say, mavericks of the younger generation who really, they want to make a mark, but they actually have intent and they have dedication. And I think you're one of those people, because it is rare, even if you do have, famous parents, a lot of those kids do not generate any results. And I think with you, I met you at lunch a couple of weeks ago, and I'd been following you. And so I saw that you were someone who is going to be a trailblazer. And I think that you are someone who has a message, not necessarily just in your activism, but all the things that you want to do. What was the epiphany? I know that, when you were 13, you realized you were gay, and yes, that's a big epiphany for someone who's living in France, with two, well-known parents. But going forward, now that you have experienced all of that, what is the intent or your goal that you would say, James wants to do this in his life, or what's the next step that you really want to accomplish, or within the next year?
I've been doing a lot of these interviews. The show is called Duke's Download, and it's a thing I've been doing on Instagram since March 2020, since the beginning of COVID, where I thought, given the fact that we can't see each other in person, how can I hopefully try to, make a difference and, have open, honest, interesting conversations with important people. And I have a pretty eclectic mix of interests. So I love politics, I love pop culture. So, it's been an interesting selection of people. And, I feel like I've made an impact through that, even in just a small way. I feel like, a lot of the people I've interviewed, people, the governor of Colorado, members of Congress, state legislators, people in pop culture, like I said, actors. And I feel like, it's built sort of a buzz, and it's created some dialogue, and that's been really really fulfilling. So I'm hoping that I can parlay that into, whether it's on TV or podcast even, or I'm hoping to sort of take that to the next level, while simultaneously continuing to write. I've written freelance for a bunch of different places since I was 17 years old, mainly about politics, but also about LGBT cultural issues. So definitely want to continue doing that. And that's such a fulfilling thing as well, because it gives you the feeling, when you put an article out there, you're expressing your opinion, the idea that other people are reading that and you're hopefully affecting other people and maybe making them think about, issues in a different way. It makes you feel like, even on a small level, that you're having an impact in the world. And that's the best feeling, I think, just whether it's through the interviews or through my writing or through my activism, knowing that hopefully in some small way you're making the world a better place.
And if you had to say, it could be a multiple thing of things that inspired you, what was the main inspiration for you in the last couple of years?
And professionally, I would say, if you had to ask me who I would like to be when I'm, 40 or 50, or, it would be, and it was funny, I was just actually talking to my dad about this, how, ideally my goal is to be like a mix of Anderson Cooper and mixed with Andy Cohen. So,
okay, that's a good combo.
Culture. Say that again?
That's a great combo.
Well, it's funny because they're friends. And I think it's funny that, and I've never met them in person. I've spoken to both of them online and whatever. But, the fact that you've got a little politics, and I love politics, and I would say that's actually probably my main interest. But I also love, like, one of my favorite lines ever was Melissa Rivers. I did one of my interviews with her, and she said, sometimes it's nice to go to like the more high level, high level stuff, politics and stuff. But then it's nice to go back to the shallow end of the pool. And sometimes I love, watching e-news and reading, Daily Mail and Page Six and all that stuff. Sometimes having a little bit of both, so you can engage in the serious stuff, but then when your brain's a little exhausted, go back to the more, trivial stuff. It's good to have a mix of both in your life.
Absolutely. If you had any fear, what's James's biggest fear?
I would say feeling, this may sound kind of pretentious, I don't mean it that way, but I really have always felt a strong desire to live a meaningful life. And like I said, that feeling of knowing that even if it is on a local level, I ran for a local office in West Hollywood. So it's not about wanting to be famous or anything like that. It's more just the feeling that your life has meaning and that you're impacting the world. And that, even when you put an article out, knowing that someone read that and that it actually changed them or, impacted them. That's the most fulfilling feeling in the world. And, so I would say my biggest fear would be not, by the end of my life, whenever that is, not feeling like I made a difference. And, that's been sort of my number one goal since I was a kid, since I started, writing and doing my activism work.
Yes, I definitely think you have to write books, because I feel that very strongly when I met you, and I even said that to you. But I feel that, the message that you have is a viewpoint that's needed to be spoken or written from your eyes just because of your experiences. But traveling the world and living in different countries, what was your favorite country that you say, ooh, I really want to go back there?
Well, living in Europe certainly was an amazing experience. I spent most of my life in France up until I was 18. And then I also lived in London in England for 3 years. And both of those experiences, I mean, they're beautiful, amazing countries. In terms of where I visited, I'd have to say I actually really loved Thailand, which is where my parents lived up until recently, because it's a really, amazing country, very progressive politically, very culturally diverse. And also, I just love the heat and the tropical weather. And they lived in the city, but we would go to the beach not too far away. We'd take a car and drive a few hours away to the beach. So that country was really interesting and really exciting, and it was very different. But also, I love the fact that they were so culturally progressive on gay rights and trans rights. And so I would say, out of all the places I've been, that Thailand is probably one of my favorite countries.
What inspires you musically?
It's funny. I always say that I have no singing ability or no, I can't play instruments at all. But I feel lucky that, growing up, I would be with my mom, she would be playing her CD player in our house in France, and she'd be playing everything from the Beach Boys to Serge Gainsbourg to Crowded House. I mean, like a really eclectic mix of music. So I really grew up, I think, with the benefit of having her, her musical ear. And so I think I actually, if I may say so myself, I actually think I have good taste in music. I love everything from like the Beach Boys, the 50s and 60s to 80s music. Putting my mom aside, I love 80s. I mean, I love New Order and Erasure and this I love like new wave and I also listen to top 40. So I love Lady Gaga. I listen to a lot of contemporary stuff too. But I like my mom actually. I have a pretty eclectic mix of musical taste.
What does love mean to James?
For sure, family. I'm an only child, and I grew up, in a kind of remote place where because I left LA when I was so young, I never really felt like I had roots. I felt kind of, not to say I felt lost. I mean, I had a pretty good childhood in most respects, but, I always wanted to come back to LA because I loved LA and always wanted to come back here. I knew that as a kid that when I was old enough, I would move back to the States. So for me, family and my parents and, being close to them, they gave me sort of a strong sense of identity and we're still super close. We didn't see each other for 18 months, which was tough, really tough, as you can imagine, but they've been back here now for 2 months, and so that's been amazing. And of course, dating and relationships, which isn't always easy in LA. I'm on all the apps and on all the working on that at the moment, but for sure at the moment and thus far, my family has been, what love is all about.
What do you think the most common reason why people are unhappy?
It's a tough question. I think for me anyway, I think having meaning in your life is really important. And it sounds so like, again, pretentious, but like having, really having a purpose bigger than yourself. Because even when I lost my council race, city council here, I immediately delved into my activism work. And that immediately gave me like this feeling of like, even if I lost that race, at least I was having an impact and out there. And, and so that doing something in your life, whether it's charity work, or activism, or anything, even donating to causes or can be feeling like you're making a difference, I think is important. And also, I think just, this has been really difficult during COVID, I think you can get, if you're lonely, you can be unhappy. And so I feel really lucky. I live in a community here that's in West Hollywood that's pretty connected. I have my family, as I mentioned. I have some good friends in my life that, make me feel, help me in those moments where maybe I'm feeling a little lonely or disconnected. So I think that's really important.
During the COVID, what is the one thing that you would say, I realized I cannot live without this?
Well, technology for sure. I feel like, which I hate to say, but I've said often during this whole thing that, imagine what this would have been like. Because my mom and dad, lived up until they just came to LA 2 months ago. Up until now, for that 18-month period, we were completely, away from each other. We were 8,000 miles apart. So, I've often said, my God, can you imagine what this whole thing would have been like if, we hadn't had FaceTime or Zoom or, thank God this happened now. If it was going to happen, at least COVID happened now instead of 20 years ago or 30 years ago or even 10 years ago. So technology, unfortunately, I think we've seen how important and how critical that really is to our lives.
What is the one thing you say I don't need anymore based on my experience in COVID?
That's a really tough one. I think, what do I not need anymore? I mean, COVID. I mean, I do think, like I said, I sort of the inverse of that. the sort of the other perspective when it comes to social media is, I think in a good way, actually, it means that a lot of the things we used to do are maybe not necessary anymore. We can do interviews over Zoom. We can do meetings, virtually. And, I think that's probably going to be a permanent change, at least, in terms of meetings. And, I think the world has probably changed forever after this, because a lot of the old ways of doing things, in terms of, workforce and even events and all that. I mean, the world's it probably will mean that things are more efficient now, and that people are capable of getting more done. And and also I know for a lot of nonprofits, a lot of them have changed to doing events online and virtually, and they've actually expanded their realm of, their audience and people that are able to donate. And so I think there are a few silver linings to this whole experience.
If James, if you were granted one wish for humanity and the planet, what would that be?
You know, it sounds cliche, but there are so many areas of the world, obviously where there's a lot of violence and conflict. And I've just wrote an article actually not too long ago about what's happening in Afghanistan, and the fact that we're going to withdraw the U.S. military, which I think is a good thing. But obviously there are a lot of populations, minority groups, women, LGBTQ people who are probably going to be killed, or and oppressed now under the new regime, if the Taliban so I mean, that's just an example. But I mean, in Africa, in Brunei, I'm still working on the issue of the boycott of all the Dorchester collection hotels because of the Sultan of Brunei owning them, and he also implemented Sharia law in his country. So so there are a lot of areas of the world where even though we're doing better in America when it comes to LGBTQ issues, there are still a lot of areas where, Russia, Chechnya, where there's a lot of serious problems going on. So my big wish would be that I hope in the next few years, in years and decades to come, that we're going to see some change, like some of the same kind of changes in those countries that we've seen here in the United States.
If you could go back in time and ask one question from someone in history who's no longer with us, who would that be, and what would you ask?
I think for me, it would be fascinating to sit down with someone like Harvey Milk, who, and I've been lucky enough to become friends and work with Cleve Jones, who was his protege. And so I've learned a lot of Harvey's lessons from Cleve. But I feel like talking to someone like Harvey Milk, who, in such a short period of time, made such a huge impact on not just the gay community, but on the world. He was only in office for less than a year, and has gone on and posthumously, to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and to have such an impact politically and culturally, and it continues to this day. So I would ask him, for tips on how to be an effective activist, and how to make as big a mark as possible in a short period of time. And and even the things I learned from Cleve. I've been so lucky to actually become friends with some of these people like Cleve Jones, who later, after we worked with Harvey, went on to create the National AIDS Quilt and be a huge leader on HIV/AIDS. So and I've gotten the benefit of learning from him about civil disobedience and activism, and how to get different stakeholders and community groups together. And so I would ask Harvey, how do you think I can make as big an impact as possible in a short period of time?
In your experience so far in this life, and I know you have a long life, what has been the biggest challenge that you've had to overcome, or let's say experience?
Well, this is sort of a diversion from, or a segue from what we've been talking about. But for me, I've dealt with a lot of insecurity and and self-esteem issues when it comes to my weight. And I think I read a social media post about this not too long ago. I think given that, as I mentioned, so much of our lives is based around technology now. I feel like with social media, I mean, I know even for me, and I feel like someone who's fairly self-aware and who understands that, that some of this isn't, real, and that we shouldn't judge each other based on what we only see on social media and all that. But I know that since I was a teenager, it's gotten worse in some respects. My issues with self-esteem and body image and all that, has been a real challenge. And I've gone to 12-step meetings about that, about my overeating and everything, and using and body image and all that. It's tough, and that's an issue that I feel like maybe we don't talk about enough, in our society. And I mean, thankfully, we're starting to see it more and more. But I think particularly in the gay community, there's a big issue with that, and that's something that I'm hoping, that I can, hopefully talk more and more about, and hopefully, again, in some small way at least,
And
maybe it's going to help other people.
and I think, James, that warrants various articles that you should write about that. And really, the thing you have to understand is when we have certain issues, I think when we look within ourselves and love ourselves, whether we look at ourselves as judging ourselves as good or bad, we have to look at the mindfulness of that. You love all the good parts of James and all the bad parts of the judgmental. Oh, I'm overweight, I eat, da 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 da. But the thing is, when you start to come from that place of knowing that you are enough, you don't have to overeat, because the overeating is also actually that you're eating the wrong foods, you're combining the wrong stuff. And really, I'm obsessed about wellness and eating right. And if you eat right, you will not gain weight, because you're eating the foods that are nutritious for your body, and then your cells are going to be happy. So really, I think all you have to do is just change your eating habits and look at it that, because there's nothing wrong with you, James. I think you're amazing, and you will change this weight situation. But it's really about taking action of the dominion of you saying, you know what, I have a healthy, sturdy, in shape body. Whatever that in shape body needs to be for me, I don't have to look like the poster child, or I don't have to be this. And I think once you make alignment with that, then everything falls into place. But I do feel that many people do suffer this, or they have the opposite, where they think they are too fat and they don't eat.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, the whole eating thing, is so complicated because, I mean, it isn't, but it is, because, like for instance, I remember someone saying, there's a couple things, but like a couple thoughts were, number one, the whole thing of, oh, I want to eat when I'm happy, because it's like, oh, I had a great day. I want to celebrate by having, cookies or whatever it may be. Or if you're sad, you're like, oh, I want to eat to drown my sorrows. So, so there's like that double thing. And then also the fact that I'm like, not to say that, like my mom has been sober for 12 or 15 years, or 16 years. So, so I respect, and I think the whole alcohol abuse, drug abuse thing is obviously really difficult. But the food thing is in some ways even more difficult, because, you have to eat to live every single day. Every meal is a choice. Every meal is, an opportunity either to, make the right choice or to screw up. And so, the whole eating thing has its own dynamics, and it also is connected to a lot of other stuff, and I don't just mean with me personally. I mean, people eat because of, it's a coping mechanism, I mean, there's all sorts of layers to it. So, but I think, in my life, it's been one of those things that, and the food is sort of is connected to the insecurity and the self-esteem, but it also is a separate thing. So I would just say, the good news is that if even when you're dealing, or whoever it may be is dealing with those sorts of issues, at least in the meantime, feeling like you're doing something worthwhile, and it's more, that's why I said, it's so important to have something bigger than yourself, that you can turn to. Because if all you're thinking about, is yourself, and sometimes I admit, I can get a little bit self, absorbed, where I'm overthinking about things, and it's important to be like, wait a second, I've got, this active, advocacy project I'm working on, or I'm writing a new article, or so, just important also to keep things in perspective.
Good, good. Um, Answer these questions easily with one word or two words. What's your favorite thing to wake up to do on a Sunday morning?
I love going to brunch.
Okay.
I love being with friends, and I love my favorite thing to do is, as you can tell, is to talk, and not just talk, but listen and actually have meaningful fun. But that's kind of what I was doing with my show, trying to have fun but meaningful, and open conversations with people.
Next question.
Sorry, that wasn't one word. But...
No, that's okay. You can do two words. How about, what does love mean?
Loyalty.
How about God?
Universe.
Good. Well, here we are with James, the incredible James, and I want to thank you for spending this time with me. I think you're dynamic, and I can't wait to see all the things you do and how I can support you in your views and your vision and what you want to do. But I think it's if people want to get a hold of you, they can Instagram you at James Duke Mason. They can watch, more interviews with you as you download your podcasts. Well, it's not a podcast. Well, it is a podcast, really. It's just
I'm looking
live.
at turning it into a podcast.
I think you should.
It started on Instagram, but now I feel like the more I do these interviews, I've got some good guests on the horizon. I feel like I should turn it into a podcast, but otherwise it's kind of not a waste, but you know what I mean? It would be an addition to what I'm already doing that I think would make it even more accessible to people.
So let's put the intent that we will be seeing James on his podcast, his television shows, and reading all his best-selling worldwide books and Commentator.
You're an inspiration, Gary. Seriously.
He's going to be commentating with Andy and who's the other one?
Oh,
Anderson.
Andy and Andy. Yeah.
So you'll be the three amigos. Good.
So, hey, from your mouth to God's ear.
Let's put it out there. All right, James, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for coming on the show. Our time's up.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you all for joining me for this version of Ready, Set, Live. Until next time, stay well and be well.